By taking the time to educate him and expose him to the peaceful teachings of Confucius, without ever renouncing the violent ways of the Mongols, she encouraged the two sides of his nature that was to be the key to his success. The fact that Sorcaktani raised her sons and ruled her lands in such a different way to the male Mongol warlords was to have a huge influence on Khubilai. In 1236, at the age of 21, Khubilai was granted his own lands by his uncle Ogadai, who had succeeded Genghis on his death in 1227. These lands were in the Hope region of northern China. At first, Khubilai ruled his lands from his Mongolian home. He left day-to-day affairs to local officials, just like other Mongol nobles, who had little interest in everyday issues at local level. But in his absence, the already poor farmers were heavily taxed, or they were taken away from their farms to provide labor for state schemes like road building. With his mother's influence, Khubilai decided to change things. He instituted reform that was gratefully received in his lands by the peasants of northern China. Roads and bridges were improved, and he did much to improve the quality of life for ordinary people.
He was also, in a way that may seem to us rather modern, concerned to make sure that welfare provisions for the destitute and the poor were sufficiently well arranged. This meant that, for instance, areas which had suffered from war or drought or famine were relieved of their tax obligations for a certain amount of time until they could once again afford to actually pay taxes to the central treasury. And instead of paying taxes, quite often they were given either food or monetary subsidies by the central government to make sure that they got themselves back on their feet.
So from an early age, Khubilai started to show the qualities of an enlightened and progressive ruler. He extended the Mongol postal system, which was the most advanced in the world. This opened up the area to trade and ensured that his messages reached the most remote areas. But back in the Mongol capital Karakoram, the more traditional families distrusted Khubilai and his mother. They thought they were selling out and becoming too much like the Chinese merchants who the Mongols had always robbed from in the past. What is clear is that even at this early stage in his career, Khubilai was setting the pattern for the way that he was going to rule. One of the most significant things was the fact that he didn't work alone. Instead, he would always consult a wide range of advisors.
Quite often when he didn't necessarily understand an idea, whether it was about warfare or about governance, he would show no embarrassment in calling in advisors and actually asking them what he should do. And interestingly, one of the most important influences in his life was his favourite wife, Chabi, who in fact advised him not only on his path to conquest of China before he actually got to be the emperor, but also about good governance while he actually sat on the emperor's throne.
Khubilai had married Chabi in 1239, and their first son was born a year later. She encouraged men of the arts and science to come to the court to debate with Khubilai, and seems to have been a moderating force on him. Khubilai relied on Chabi throughout his life for support and guidance. In later years, her personality, practicality and interests would influence the fashions and trends of an empire. But Chabi wasn't his only wife, because Khubilai was a Mongol, and this was a culture in which Khans traditionally had 4 wives. Khubilai was no exception, and ultimately he had 4 households and a magnificent harem. But as an ambitious young man, Khubilai had more important things on his mind, especially when his brother Mongol was elected Great Khan after the death of their uncle Ogadai in 1251. This was the opportunity Khubilai had been waiting for. When his brother became Great Khan, Khubilai's wealth and standing rose overnight as he was granted new lands in northern China by Mongol. What Khubilai needed now was the chance to prove himself as a warrior. This was vital. Throughout Mongol history, military success was the key to being seen as a strong leader. His opportunity came when Mongke decided to finish the campaign his uncles had started against the southern Sung Empire. A direct assault on the Sung was risky and predictable. Instead, Mongke planned a two-pronged pincer attack. Two Mongol armies would descend on the Sung simultaneously from both the north and west, but the plan had a drawback. On the western route, the independent non-Chinese kingdom of Nanchao stood directly in the way. It would have to be dealt with if the Mongols were to succeed against the Song Empire. Kublai was selected to lead the attack on Nanchao and received the order to move in July 1252. Conquering Nanchao meant a direct assault on its fortified capital, Tali. This invasion was no easy task. Massive obstacles had to be overcome. 3 great rivers and the rugged mountain ranges of the Tibetan Plateau lay in Kublai's path. Envoys that Kublai sent ahead to tell the king to submit were beheaded, and the kingdom of Nanchao refused to surrender. After 2 months, Kublai's forces reached the banks of the mighty Yangtze River. The critical moment had come, but there were no bridges. On the opposite bank, the Tali army slept, confident that Kublai's army could not cross the river. But Kublai directed his men to make inflatable bags from sheepskins, and they crossed the river late that night in a surprise attack. The Tali forces were cut down in their thousands by the Mongol cavalry as they attempted to flee back to the capital. Soon the Mongol forces were at the gates of Tali. Everyone inside knew that Mongol tradition was to slaughter the inhabitants of the first city they took on a campaign as an example to the rest of the country. But Kublai was different. He promised that the city would be spared if they surrendered peacefully. Sensibly, Tali opted to do so, and Kublai kept his word. Victorious, Kublai returned to northern China and began to build an impressive new capital city. Called Shangtu, it would be built Chinese style in the lands between Mongolia and China. The new city, which was later immortalized in European literature as Xanadu, aroused concern among Mongol traditionalists. To them, it appeared the young upstart had become Chinese. For a Mongol prince to build a city in China was bad. But when reports arrived that it rivaled the Mongol capital Karakoram, it was too much. And as news arrived that Kublai had overturned Mongol taxation policies, charges of treason were inevitable, as was a family rift that threatened to tear the Mongol Empire apart. But after a period of tension, Kublai's strong relationship with his brother Mongke saved his position. If Mongke was to succeed in overcoming the Sung Empire, he would need his brother's diplomatic flair and the Chinese allies that Kublai was gathering around him. Kublai was given command of one of 4 massive Mongol armies, which left Shangtu in 1258. The Mongol forces made swift progress into central China, but as they reached the banks of the Yangtze River, disaster struck. The south's warm, oppressive climate made it a hotbed for disease. Mongke went down with a serious case of dysentery and died suddenly. The great Khan left no successor, and the Mongol world came to an abrupt halt. The Sung campaign was abandoned. Karakoram was in a state of crisis. Who would take up the position of Great Khan? From the 4 corners of the Mongol Empire, nobles came rushing